The summer air was thick with possibility as I stepped out of the car and into my aunt's driveway. The house looked the same as it always did: white shutters, a wraparound porch, and the faint hum of cicadas in the distance. But this summer felt different. Ryan was here. My cousin, my best friend, my occasional rival. He was leaning against the porch railing, a lazy grin stretching across his face as he watched me unload my bags. "Took you long enough," he called, his voice teasing. "I was starting to think you weren't coming." I rolled my eyes but couldn't hide my smile. "Yeah, well, traffic had other plans." "You gonna help me with these or just stand there looking smug?" He jogged down the steps, taking one of the bags from my hands. "Smug? Me? Never." His tone was light, but there was something in the way he looked at me, something that made my stomach twist in the best way. Ryan had always been like this. Confident, charming, just a little unpredictable. We'd spent summers together since we were kids, but this year felt charged. Maybe it was the way he'd grown into himself, taller and broader than the last time I'd seen him. Or maybe it was the way his eyes lingered on me a little too long, like he was trying to figure me out. The days fell into an easy rhythm. We played basketball in the driveway, the sun baking our skin as we trash-talked each other mercilessly. We swam in the lake behind the house, the water cool and refreshing against the summer heat. And at night, we'd sit on the porch, talking about everything and nothing until the stars blurred above us. It was during one of those nights, under the soft glow of the porch light, that everything changed. We were playing Truth or Dare, something we hadn't done since we were kids. It started innocently enough, daring each other to do stupid things like eat a spoonful of hot sauce or run around the yard in the dark. But then Ryan's dare changed the game. "I dare you," he said, leaning back in his chair with that smirk I knew too well, "to kiss me." I froze. "What?" "You heard me." His voice was casual, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes, curiosity, maybe. Or challenge. I laughed nervously. "That's not, come on. That's not how this game works." "Why not?" He shrugged, but his gaze never left mine. "You scared?" And that was the thing about Ryan. He always knew how to push my buttons. I wasn't scared. At least, that's what I told myself. But as I stood up and stepped closer to him, my heart was pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it. When our lips met, it was soft. Tentative. But then something shifted. His hand came up to cup my cheek, and the kiss deepened. It wasn't just a dare anymore. It was something else entirely. Something that made my chest ache and my head spin. We pulled apart slowly, both of us breathing heavily. I couldn't look at him. I didn't know what to say. What did this mean? What did I mean? Ryan cleared his throat, breaking the silence. "Well, that was unexpected." I laughed, but it came out sounding strained. "Yeah. Unexpected." We didn't talk about it that night. Or the next day. But the air between us felt heavier, charged with something I couldn't name. Every time our eyes met, my stomach did a somersault. Every time he brushed past me, my skin felt like it was on fire. The tension grew with each passing day. It was in the way he'd catch me staring and hold my gaze just a little too long. In the way he'd tease me about things he knew would make me blush. In the way he'd sit just close enough on the porch that our knees would almost touch. And then, one night, it all came to a head. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, when I heard my door creak open. I froze as Ryan slipped inside, closing the door softly behind him. He didn't say anything, just stood there in the dim light, his face unreadable. "Ryan?" My voice was barely above a whisper. He crossed the room in a few quick strides, sitting down on the edge of my bed. His hand reached out, brushing a strand of hair away from my face. The touch was so gentle it made my breath catch. "I can't stop thinking about it," he admitted, his voice low. "That kiss. I can't stop thinking about you." My heart felt like it was about to burst out of my chest. "Ryan, But he didn't let me finish. His lips were on mine again, and this time, there was no hesitation. His hands found their way into my hair, pulling me closer, and I let myself get lost in the moment. In him. It was overwhelming. The way he touched me, the way he kissed me, like I was the only thing that mattered. Like this was the only place in the world he wanted to be. When we finally pulled apart, we were both breathing hard, our foreheads resting together. Neither of us spoke. There were no words for what had just happened. for what it meant. And then, just as quietly as he'd come, Ryan stood up and left the room. I stared at the closed door, my mind racing. What had just happened? What did it mean? And most importantly, what happened next? The next morning, I woke up with a pit in my stomach. Ryan was already gone, leaving nothing but a hastily scribbled note on the kitchen counter. "I'm sorry. I can't do this. I'm leaving." I read the words over and over, trying to make sense of them. He was gone. Just like that. And I was left with 1,000 questions and a heart that felt like it had been shattered into a million pieces. I spent the rest of the summer in a daze, going through the motions but feeling completely hollow. Everywhere I looked, I saw reminders of him. Of us. The basketball hoop, the lake, the porch swing where we'd spent so many nights laughing and talking like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. And I didn't know how to go back. The days blurred together after Ryan left. I tried to keep myself busy, jogging in the mornings, swimming laps in the lake until my muscles screamed, but nothing could fill the void he'd left behind. Everywhere I turned, I was haunted by his absence. The basketball hoop stood silent, the ball untouched since the last time we'd played together. The porch swing creaked in the wind, a cruel reminder of the nights we'd spent talking until the stars faded. I avoided it altogether after a while. It hurt too much to sit there alone. My aunt noticed the change in me, of course. She'd always been perceptive, but this time, she didn't pry. Instead, she'd leave me plates of food on the counter or suggest we watch a movie together, her quiet way of letting me know she was there. I appreciated it, but I couldn't bring myself to open up. How could I explain something I didn't even understand myself? The nights were the worst. That's when the memories would come flooding back: Ryan's laughter, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the warmth of his hand on my shoulder. And then, inevitably, my thoughts would drift to that night. The way he'd looked at me in the dim light of my room, the way his breath had hitched when I touched him. It was like a loop I couldn't escape, no matter how hard I tried. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I found myself standing at the edge of the lake, staring at the water. It was calm, the surface reflecting the fading light in a way that made it look almost otherworldly. I don't know how long I stood there, lost in thought, but the sound of footsteps behind me pulled me back to reality. I turned, half expecting to see my aunt, but it wasn't her. It was Ryan. My heart stopped. He looked the same tall, with that same confident posture I'd always admired, but there was something different about him. He seemed uncertain. Hesitant. We stood there for what felt like an eternity, just staring at each other, neither of us saying a word. Finally, he broke the silence. "I didn't think you'd still be here," he said, his voice quiet, almost shy. I didn't know how to respond. My mind was racing, a whirlwind of emotions I couldn't begin to untangle. Anger. Relief. Fear. Hope. It was all there, bubbling beneath the surface. "Why did you leave?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He looked away, his jaw tightening. "I didn't know what else to do," he admitted. "I was scared. I still am." "Of what?" I pressed, taking a step closer. He hesitated, his eyes flickering back to mine. "Of this. Of us. Of what it means." I swallowed hard. My heart pounding in my chest. "It doesn't have to mean anything," I said, though the words felt hollow even as I spoke them. "We can just figure it out as we go." He shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "It's not that simple, and you know it." "Then make it simple," I shot back, my voice rising. "Stop running away. Stop leaving me to deal with this alone." He flinched, the pain in his eyes unmistakable. "I didn't want to hurt you," he said softly. I didn't know how to face it. How to face you." I took another step toward him, my hands trembling at my sides. "You're here now," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "So face me." For a moment, he just stared at me, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he closed the distance between us, his hand reaching up to brush against my cheek. His touch was gentle, almost reverent, and it sent a shiver down my spine. "I missed you," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. The words broke something inside me, and before I could second-guess myself, I closed the gap between us, my lips meeting his in a kiss that felt like a lifetime of unspoken words. It was different this time, softer, more tentative, but the intensity was still there, burning just beneath the surface. When we finally pulled away, I rested my forehead against his, my breath coming in short, uneven gasps. "Don't leave again," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Please." He hesitated, his fingers lacing through mine. "I don't know if I can promise that," he admitted, his voice barely audible. "But I'll try." It wasn't the reassurance I'd hoped for, but it was something. And for now, that was enough. We stayed like that for a while, neither of us wanting to break the fragile peace we'd found. But eventually, the reality of the situation began to seep back in, and with it came the questions neither of us was ready to answer. "What do we do now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He sighed, his thumb brushing against the back of my hand. "I don't know," he admitted. "But we'll figure it out. Together." The words should have been comforting, but there was a hesitance in his tone that made my stomach twist. I wanted to believe him, to trust that this time would be different. But deep down, I couldn't shake the fear that this was just another temporary reprieve, that he'd disappear again, leaving me to pick up the pieces. As if sensing my unease, he pulled me into a tight embrace, his arms wrapping around me in a way that felt both familiar and foreign. "I'm sorry," he murmured into my hair. "For everything." I wanted to tell him it was okay, that we could move past this. But the words caught in my throat, leaving us suspended in a silence that spoke volumes. When he finally pulled away, his eyes were dark with a mix of emotions I couldn't begin to decipher. "We should go back," he said, his voice strained. "Before it gets too late." I nodded, though the last thing I wanted was to leave this moment behind. We walked back to the house in silence, the tension between us palpable. Every step felt like a countdown, a reminder that whatever this was, it was fragile and it could shatter at any moment. When we reached the porch, he stopped, turning to face me with a look I couldn't quite place. "Do you want me to stay?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. "Do you want to?" I countered, my voice trembling. He hesitated, his eyes searching mine for something, answers, maybe, or reassurance. "I don't know," he admitted. "But I think I need to." The words sent a shiver down my spine, and for a moment, I thought about saying yes. About pulling him inside and pretending, just for a little while, that we could have this. That we could be us. But then I thought about the note he'd left, the way he'd walked away without a word. And I couldn't shake the fear that history would repeat itself, that he'd leave again, and this time, it would break me for good. "I don't know if I can do this," I admitted, my voice barely audible. "Not if you're just going to leave again." He flinched, the pain in his eyes unmistakable. "I'm not saying it'll be easy," he said softly. "But I'm here now. Isn't that enough?" I wanted to say yes. I wanted to believe it was. But what if it's not? I whispered, my voice breaking. He didn't answer. Instead, he reached out, his hand brushing against my cheek in a gesture that felt so achingly familiar it made my chest hurt. "Then we'll figure it out," he said, his voice steady. "Together." The words hung between us, a fragile promise I wasn't sure either of us could keep. But as I looked into his eyes, those same eyes I'd spent countless nights dreaming about, I realized I didn't have a choice. I was in too deep, and there was no going back. "Okay," I whispered, my voice trembling. "But you have to promise me something." "Anything," he said, his gaze unwavering. "Don't hurt me again," I said, the words barely audible. "Please." The days after Ryan's return felt like walking on thin ice. Every glance, every word, every accidental brush of his hand against mine sent a jolt through me, a mix of longing and fear. We fell back into our old routines, basketball in the afternoon, swimming in the lake, late-night conversations on the porch, but there was a new undercurrent, something unspoken but impossibly loud. Ryan was trying. I could see it in the way he looked at me when he thought I wasn't paying attention, in the way he lingered just a little too long after passing me a basketball or a towel. But there was also a distance, a hesitation that hadn't been there before. It was as if he was holding back, and that uncertainty gnawed at me. One evening, after dinner, we found ourselves alone on the porch. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The air was warm, thick with the scent of summer, grass, flowers, and the faint tang of the lake. Ryan sat on the steps, his back to me, his shoulders relaxed but his posture tense in a way I'd come to recognize. I hesitated for a moment before sitting down beside him, my heart pounding. For a while, neither of us spoke. The silence stretched between us, heavy but not uncomfortable. I could feel the weight of everything we weren't saying, everything we were both too afraid to confront. Finally, Ryan broke the silence. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we hadn't kissed? He asked, his voice low, almost hesitant. His words caught me off guard, and I turned to look at him, searching his face for some clue as to where this was going. But his expression was unreadable, his eyes fixed on the horizon. No, I said after a beat, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions raging inside me. Because it's pointless. We did kiss, and now everything's different. Ryan didn't respond right away. He just nodded slowly, as if he'd expected that answer but hadn't been prepared for the weight of it. Finally, he turned to me, his eyes dark with something I couldn't quite place. Do you regret it? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The question hung in the air between us, heavy with implications. I didn't have to think about my answer. No, I said immediately, my voice firm. Do you? Ryan didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked away, his jaw tightening as if he was wrestling with something. I held my breath, waiting for his response, my heart pounding in my chest. Finally, he turned back to me, his eyes meeting mine with an intensity that made my stomach flip. No, he said quietly. I don't regret it. But I'm scared. His admission surprised me, but it shouldn't have. I'd been feeling the same way, terrified of what this meant for us, of where it could lead, of how much it could hurt if it all fell apart. But hearing him say it out loud made it more real, more tangible. Me too, I admitted, my voice barely audible. But I don't want to be. I don't want to keep pretending like this isn't happening. Ryan's eyes softened, and for a moment, it felt like the air between us shifted, like some invisible barrier had been lifted. He reached out, his hand hesitating for a moment before brushing against mine. The touch was tentative, almost shy, but it sent a jolt of electricity through me. I didn't pull away, and neither did he. What do we do now? He asked. His voice barely above a whisper. There was a vulnerability in his tone that made my chest ache, a raw honesty that I hadn't heard from him before. I didn't have an answer. How could I? This wasn't something I'd ever prepared for, something I'd ever imagined. But as I really looked at him, I realized that maybe we didn't need a plan. Maybe we just needed to take it one step at a time. I don't know, I admitted, my voice soft. But I think we figure it out together. Ryan nodded slowly, his hand still resting against mine. For a moment, neither of us spoke, the silence between us comfortable but charged. Finally, Ryan broke the stillness, his voice low and tentative. Can I kiss you? He asked, his eyes searching mine for permission. The question caught me off guard, but it didn't take me long to nod, my heart pounding in my chest. When his lips met mine, it was different from the other kisses we'd shared. It was slower, softer, more deliberate, as if he was trying to memorize the feel of me, the taste of me. I kissed him back with the same intensity, my hand reaching up to cup his cheek, my fingers tangling in his hair. It felt like we were suspended in time, like the world had stopped spinning just for us. When we finally pulled away, neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. The look in his eyes said everything I needed to hear. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with everything that had happened. The weight of it all was almost too much to bear, but for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of clarity. This wasn't going to be easy. There would be challenges, obstacles, moments of doubt and fear. But I was willing to face them, as long as Ryan was by my side. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of footsteps outside my door. I sat up, my heart skipping a beat, and a moment later, the door creaked open. Ryan stood there, his hair messy from sleep, his face soft in the early morning light. Morning, he said quietly, his voice rough with sleep. There was a nervousness in his tone, a hesitance that hadn't been there the night before. Morning, I replied, my voice equally soft. He lingered in the doorway for a moment, as if unsure whether to come in or not. Finally, he stepped inside, closing the door behind him. I couldn't sleep, he admitted, running a hand through his hair. I kept thinking about last night. Me too, I said as he sat down on the edge of the bed. The mattress dipped under his weight, and I could feel the heat of his body even inches away. He trailed off, his voice faltering. I don't want to mess this up again. His words struck a chord deep within me, and I reached out, my hand brushing against his. You won't, I said firmly, my eyes meeting his. We'll figure it out. I promise. Ryan nodded slowly, his eyes searching mine for reassurance. For a moment, neither of us spoke, the silence between us charged with something unspoken. Then, almost hesitantly, he leaned in, his lips brushing against mine in a kiss that was soft but full of promise. When he pulled away, there was a look in his eyes that made my stomach flip, a mix of hope and fear, of vulnerability and determination. "We're in this together," he said quietly, his voice steady despite the uncertainty in his eyes. I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. "Together," I agreed. But as he stood up and walked to the door, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was still something he wasn't saying. He paused with his hand on the doorknob, his back to me, and for a moment, it felt like he was about to turn around, to tell me something important. But then he stepped out into the hallway, the door closing softly behind him, leaving me with nothing but the echo of his words and the ache of something still unspoken. The days after Ryan's promise felt both heavier and lighter at the same time. Lighter because there was a sense of relief, of understanding between us, something unspoken but acknowledged. Heavier because every glance, every touch, every word carried an undercurrent of tension I wasn't sure how to navigate. We fell back into our routines: basketball in the driveway, swimming in the lake, late-night conversations on the porch, but now, there was a shift. A quiet awareness that neither of us could ignore. One evening, after dinner, my aunt settled into her favorite armchair with a book, her warm smile and comforting presence filling the room. I watched her for a moment, struck by how perceptive she seemed, how she always seemed to know when something was off. She caught me looking and raised an eyebrow. "Everything all right, sweetheart?" she asked, her voice soft but probing. "Yeah," I said quickly, perhaps too quickly. "Just thinking." She nodded, not pushing, but her eyes lingered on me for a moment longer than usual. "You know, if you ever need to talk, I'm here," she said gently before turning back to her book. Her words lingered in the air, a silent invitation I wasn't ready to accept. Ryan appeared in the doorway, his hair still damp from a shower, his t-shirt clinging to his frame in a way that made it hard to look away. He leaned casually against the doorframe, his eyes flicking between me and our aunt. "What's going on?" he asked, his tone light but with a hint of curiosity. "Nothing," I said, standing up and brushing past him. "Heading to bed." He followed me upstairs, his footsteps matching mine. When we reached the hallway, he grabbed my wrist, his grip firm but not painful. "Wait," he said, his voice low. "Can we talk?" I hesitated, my heart thudding in my chest. "About what?" "You know what," he said, his eyes searching mine. "Things have been weird. And I don't want it to be weird." I swallowed hard, my throat suddenly dry. "It's not weird," I lied, pulling my wrist free. "I'm just tired." He didn't buy it, but he didn't push either. Instead, he stepped closer, his presence overwhelming in the quiet hallway. "I'm trying, you know," he said softly. "To figure this out. To figure us out." I looked at him then, really looked at him. His messy hair, his soft face, the vulnerability in his eyes. He was torn, I could see it, torn between what he wanted and what he thought he should want. Torn between the fear of ruining what we had and the desire to see where this could go. And in that moment, I felt it too: the pull, the ache, the need to close the distance between us. "I know," I whispered, my voice barely audible. He hesitated, then reached out, his hand brushing against my cheek. The touch was electric, sending a shiver down my spine. "Do you?" he asked, his voice barely a breath. I nodded, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it. "Yeah," I said, my voice trembling. "I do." He leaned in then, his lips brushing against mine in a kiss that was soft, tentative, but filled with a longing that took my breath away. It wasn't like the others, the ones fueled by curiosity or impulse. This was something deeper, something raw and real and terrifying. I kissed him back, my hands gripping his shirt, pulling him closer as if I could somehow anchor us both in this moment. But then he pulled away, his breathing ragged, his eyes dark with something I couldn't quite name. "I can't do this," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Not like this." "What do you mean?" I asked, my chest tightening with panic. "I mean," he took a step back, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know what this is. What it means." And he trailed off, his eyes darting to the floor. "I can't keep pretending it's just something casual. Something that doesn't matter." "It's not casual," I said quickly, my voice desperate. "It's not. And it does matter." "Then what are we doing?" he asked, his voice rising slightly. "Because I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to be this." I stared at him, my mind racing, my heart aching. "Neither do I admitted. But isn't that the point? To figure it out together?" He shook his head, his expression pained. "I don't know. Maybe. I need space. To think. To breathe. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Space. It was the last thing I wanted, but I could see it in his eyes, the fear, the conflict, the need to pull back before things went too far. And as much as it hurt, I understood. Because I was scared too. "All right," I said quietly, my voice barely audible. "If that's what you need." He nodded, his eyes filled with a mixture of relief and regret. "It's not forever," he said, his voice soft. "Just, for now." I wanted to believe him, to hold on to the hope that this was just a pause, not an ending. But as he turned and walked down the hallway, disappearing into his room, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, something irreparable. And I was left standing there, alone, wondering if I'd ever get him back. By the next morning, Ryan was gone again. No note this time, no explanation, just an empty room and a silence that felt suffocating. My aunt found me sitting on the porch, my coffee untouched in my hands. She didn't say anything at first, just sat down beside me, her presence a quiet comfort. "He'll be back," she said finally, her voice gentle. "He just needs to figure some things out." I nodded, staring out at the lake, the surface rippling in the early morning light. "What if he doesn't?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She reached over, squeezing my hand. "Then you'll figure it out without him," she said. "But don't give up on him yet. Not while there's still hope." I wanted to believe her, to hold on to the idea that this wasn't over, that we still had a chance. But as the days passed and Ryan's absence stretched on, hope felt harder and harder to cling to. And I was left wondering if I'd ever get the chance to tell him how I really felt, that he wasn't just a cousin, or a friend, but something more. Something I wasn't ready to let go of. And then, late one evening, I heard the creak of the front door. My heart leapt into my throat as footsteps echoed down the hallway. I turned, my pulse racing, and there he was, Ryan, standing in the doorway, his face unreadable, his eyes filled with something I couldn't quite place. "Hey," he said, his voice soft. "Can we talk?" I stared at Ryan, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it. The air between us felt charged, heavy with all the things we hadn't said, all the moments we'd left unresolved. His messy hair, the faint shadow of stubble on his jaw, the way his t-shirt clung slightly to his frame, it was all so familiar, yet suddenly it felt like I was seeing him for the first time. "Talk?" I finally managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. "About what?" He stepped into the room, closing the door softly behind him. The click of the latch sounded deafening in the silence. He didn't sit down, didn't move closer, just stood there, his arms crossed over his chest, like he was trying to hold himself together. Or maybe keep me at arm's length. "About us," he said after a long pause. His voice was steady, but there was a tremble underneath, something raw and unspoken. "About everything." I swallowed hard, my throat suddenly dry. "What's there to talk about?" "You keep leaving, Ryan. You keep pulling away." He flinched, his eyes dropping to the floor. "I know," he admitted, his voice low. "And I'm sorry. I didn't know how to be around you after what happened." I felt something tighten in my chest. "After the kiss, you mean?" He nodded, still not looking at me. "Yeah. That, and everything that came after. I didn't know how to handle it. How to handle us." There it was again, that word. Us. It hung in the air between us, fragile and uncertain, like a thread that could snap at any moment. I wanted to grab onto it, to pull him closer and make him see that whatever this was, it didn't have to be scary. But the look on his face stopped me. He was conflicted, torn between wanting to say more and holding back. "Ryan," I said softly, taking a tentative step toward him. "You don't have to handle it alone. We can figure it out together." He shook his head, his jaw tightening. "That's the thing, though. I don't know if I can. I don't know if I'm ready for whatever this is." His words stung, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Then tell me what you're feeling. Help me understand." He finally looked up, his eyes meeting mine. There was something in his gaze, something intense, almost desperate. "I don't know how to explain it," he said, his voice breaking. I feel like I'm drowning every time I'm around you. Like I can't breathe unless I'm close to you, but then when I am, I feel like I'm going to lose myself. It's too much, and not enough, all at the same time." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. I'd never heard him talk like this, never seen him so vulnerable. It was like he was finally letting me see the part of himself he'd been hiding, the part he was so afraid of. And I realized then that I wasn't the only one who was scared. Ryan was just as lost as I was. "You're not going to lose yourself," I said, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions raging inside me. "But you can't keep running away, either. Not from me. Not from this." He hesitated, his eyes searching mine like he was trying to find something, a sign, maybe, that I could handle whatever he was about to say. "What if I can't stop running?" he whispered. "What if I'm not strong enough?" I took another step closer, closing the distance between us. "Then let me be strong for you. Let me help you." He let out a shaky breath, his shoulders slumping like the weight of everything he'd been carrying was finally too much. "I don't know how," he admitted. "I don't know how to do this." I reached out, my hand hovering just above his arm, not quite touching. "We'll figure it out together. One step at a time." For a moment, he didn't move. Then, slowly, he reached up and covered my hand with his fingers curling around mine. His touch was warm, grounding, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. "I'm scared," he said, his voice barely audible. "Scared of what this means. Scared of what people will think. Scared of losing you." I squeezed his hand, my heart aching at the fear in his voice. "You're not going to lose me," I promised. "No matter what happens, I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." He looked at me then, really looked at me, and for the first time, I saw something in his eyes besides fear. Something like hope. "Do you mean that?" he asked, his voice trembling. "With everything I have," I said, my own voice wavering. "I'm not giving up on us. On you." For a long moment, he just stood there, his hand still gripping mine, his eyes locked on mine like he was trying to memorize every detail of my face. Then, slowly, he leaned in, his forehead resting against mine. His breath was shaky, his body tense, but he didn't pull away. "I don't know what I'm doing," he whispered, his voice breaking. "But I know I can't keep running away from this. From you." I closed my eyes, my heart pounding in my chest. "Then stay," I said softly. "Stay, and we'll figure it out. Together." He didn't answer, not with words. Instead, he closed the last bit of distance between us, his lips brushing against mine in a kiss that was so gentle.